Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jayam Vishnupad, Paramahansa Parijakacharya, Astatata Sattva Sri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Gopimanandi Hari Hari Bol. Nasta Praeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavat Sevaya Bhagavate Tamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Narayanam namaskritya naram chayam varotaram devim sarasvatim vyasam tato jayamudirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Nara Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. And there's one other verse that I love to recite, and I'll just say the English. Persons who hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and are always taking the matter very seriously will have the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, manifested in the hearts within a short time. That's a beautiful verse. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Bhagavatam class. And welcome to our guests, especially those who haven't been here before. And in every temple all around the world, at this time in the morning, we have a Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we're reading today from 2nd Canto, Chapter 2, Text 16. Manasvabhuja malaya niyamya, svabhujya malaya niyamya, shetya itam ninayet, tatvam dhamma atmani. Atmanam atmanyavaradyujadiro labdo pashanti viramela krityat manasvabhujya malaya niyamya shetya itam ninyayet tam atmani Atmanam atmanyavaruddhadiro Pashanti Virameta Krityat. Synonyms. Please repeat. Mana, the mind. Svabudya, by his own intelligence. Amalaya, unalloyed. Niyamya, by regulating. Kshetragya, unto the living entity. Etam, all of them. Ninayet, merge. Tam, that. Atmani, the self. Atmanam, the self. Atmani, in the super self. Avarudya, being locked up. Dhira, the fully satisfied. Labda upashanti, one who has attained full bliss. Virameta, ceases from. Krityat, all other activities. Translation. Thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. Please repeat after me. Thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai. The functions of the mind are thinking, feeling and willing. When the mind is materialistic or absorbed in material contact, it acts for material advancement of knowledge, destructively ending in discovery of nuclear weapons. But when the mind acts under spiritual urge, it acts wonderfully for going back home, back to Godhead, for life in complete bliss and eternity. Therefore, the mind has to be manipulated by good and unalloyed intelligence. Perfect intelligence is to render service unto the Lord. One should be intelligent enough to understand that the living being is, in all circumstances, a servant of the circumstances. Every living being is serving the dictates of desire, anger, lust, illusion, insanity and enviousness, all materially affected. But even while executing such dictations of different temperaments, he is perpetually unhappy. When one actually feels this and turns his intelligence to inquiring about it from the right sources, he gets information of the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Instead of serving materially for the above-mentioned different humours of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament, and thus, by unalloyed intelligence, the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord, and thus a living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. When the living entity is directly seen by the Lord dictates to him to act according to his desire. And when the living entity follows him perfectly, the living entity ceases to discharge any other duty for his illusory satisfaction. In his pure unalloyed state, the living being attains the stage of full bliss, labdo pashanti, and ceases all material hankerings. Thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. What an amazing translation. I'm very glad Prabhupada writes his purports to help us understand that. So we've been reading earlier. Yesterday Giridhari gave us a forward look into the Bhagavatam in these chapters. So now we're reading verse 16 of the Lord in the Heart chapter. And Prabhupada's actually said, I read something some months ago, and Prabhupada describes Srimad Bhagavatam, which is this book for our guests that we read from. There are 12 cantos. And Prabhupada said it's the cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. So it's through reading and studying Srimad Bhagavatam and delivering the message of Bhagavatam, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, that the whole society can be re-spiritualized. And I think that's, and just to recap and contextualize this verse that we just read, Srimad Bhagavatam addresses the process of self-realization and in many different ways, and this is just one way. So we've been reading about the yogis, we've been reading about the meditation on the Virat Rupa, the universal form of the Lord. And earlier in the verse in this chapter, we read that Lord Brahma had lost his consciousness, he'd lost his remembrance, and by meditating on the universal form of the Lord, he regained that consciousness. And then he was able to please the Lord, and then he started to rebuild the creation. So there's always at the end of Brahma's day, there's a partial dissolution. At the end of his life, then there's a full dissolution. So even a conditioned soul or an unrealized soul covered by the three modes, even if he's in the position of Lord Brahma, and Lord Brahma has the highest position in this material world. Sometimes if there's a jiva or a living entity who is not qualified to take the role of Brahma, Krishna himself takes that role. So it's a very, very elevated and very, very important role. But for the jiva to take the role of Lord Brahma, he has to have executed for 100 years perfectly all of his occupational duties. So that's a very high goal to attain. So the verses that we've been reading, they then describe how we become so bewildered, and I'm quoting here, we have dreams of illusory pleasure. But no matter how we are enjoying, and no matter how much we try to achieve that enjoyment, and then we think we're enjoying, we think, I've got that Mercedes, I've got that, people mover. David Gaurahari can move all these wonderful children around. I've attained, I've got my house, I've paid off my mortgage, I've got all of these things, but we're still unhappy. No matter what we achieve, we get this little temporary tinge of happiness that, yes, I've achieved that goal. But then you start thinking, hey, that wasn't so good anyway. And what's my next goal? Now I'm not satisfied with that, I want something better. I've got a 2-bedroom house, now I want a 4-bedroom house. I have a 3-bedroom house, now I want a deck. So this constantly goes on, but we're never satisfied. And we're not satisfied because material enjoyment does not give us happiness, because we are eternally spirit. And the only way to satisfy a spiritual being is by spiritual activities. So, this whole cycle goes on and on and on, and we'll transmigrate from, high births back down to lower births, and it continues. But without the perfection of devotional service, we can't be happy. So when we first come to devotional service, of course we get very excited and we're very enthusiastic, have lots of utsara, the enthusiasm, and everything's new and everything's fresh and it's all very exciting. But if we don't develop a true taste for devotional service, then we will again be attracted to material life. But Srila Prabhupada, he explains that even if someone comes to Krishna consciousness just for a little while and then they leave, In their next life, they're guaranteed of a human form of life, and it will either be in the family of a very, very rich family or in the family of devotees. So there's no loss or diminution in whatever way we serve Krishna. So it's okay, I just got a bit of a tickle. As for the Mystic Yogis, everyone has to qualify if they get a cough. I am not sick. I just have a dry throat from singing. So these perfect Mystic Yogis, they take birth actually when they've achieved their the ultimate goal of their mystic penances and their austerities. They can actually take birth on Brahmaloka, which is the topmost planet in this universe. But at the time of death, they'll merge into the body of Brahma for those mystic yogis. And then when Brahma is liberated at the end of his life, then they have the opportunity for liberation, but they're not guaranteed liberation. They're still subjected to the chance of taking birth again. And one can ask, why is that? Why do you think that is, Devagora Hari Prabhu?
Well, we always have independence, right?
Sorry?
We always have our independence.
Yes, we have our independence, and they haven't been purified enough. They still have some material desires. And that's because they're not directly devotees of the Lord. Therefore, the path of yogic practice, as Giridhari pointed out yesterday in his nice class, is not the highest path. But this chapter is just describing for those yogis who are meditating on the Virata Rupa, and then they're meditating on the Paramatma, the Super Soul. That's a gradual elevation. And then the next two verses were advised that to endeavour only for the minimum necessities in in this world of names. And I particularly love that phrase, the world of names. And the world of names means this false identification. So we're advised in the previous verses, minimise your material desires. Restrict what you're gaining for. Is this going to be useful for me in Krishna consciousness, or is this just going to give me a big headache? Is getting that 4-bedroom house with a deck, is that just going to give me an enormous mortgage? And especially in the Wollongbar prices these days, would give anyone a headache. What to speak of living in the cities, you need to use your intelligence to restrict those. What is necessity? We don't have to be falsely renounced or artificially renounced, but we need to, restrict and minimise. So, and then in verse 6, Paramatma is again brought into the picture. I'm just giving you a little recap here. So we're advised there to render service to the Super Soul, which is Krishna in the heart. And Krishna in the heart is our best friend. And he's sitting there, or rather standing there, observing all of our activities. So we're actually never alone. Krishna is always there, seated in our hearts. And it's indeed very reassuring to know that Krishna is there. And we can actually pray to Paramatma. I know I've gone through periods in my life where it's been very, very difficult. Close, friend having cancer and different things. And I know that first thing I would do when I woke up in the morning was I would actually put my hand on my heart and pray to Paramatma. Please, my dear Lord in the heart, give me the strength to get through this day. And he actually listens. So of course we have the beautiful deities in the temple, but we also have Krishna in the heart. So it's very nice if we can establish that relationship with him and pray to him. And his beauty is resplendent, and he guides us in his service. He induces and he sanctions, and he guides us to the bona fide spiritual master. So sometimes you may wonder, well, how do I find a bona fide, a genuine, authentic spiritual master to guide me in my spiritual life? And Krishna in the heart is known as Chaitya Guru, C-A-I-T-Y-A, and he actually directs you to the pure devotee. And in our very early morning prayers, we've seen special series of verses in glorification of the spiritual master. And the last verse says, by the grace of Krishna, one finds the spiritual master, and by the grace of the spiritual master, one finds Krishna. So there's this amazing synergy that's going on. So when you have that sincere desire to serve, Krishna directs you. And our guests, you're not here just by chance. You've come here because you have sincere desire to learn more about our true life, which is our spiritual life. And then there's the process of meditating on the Lord. And we do this when we view the deity, when the curtains open and we go up and offer our prayers to the Lord and take his beautiful darshan. And we always start at his lotus feet. And there's beautiful descriptions about the beauty of Krishna's feet. And then gradually we look at his feet and we say, relish the beauty of his lotus feet. Then gradually we proceed to the knees, the waist, the chest and the face. So in that way we're preparing ourselves for that incredible beauty of seeing his face. And as we know, the different cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, they represent the different parts of the Lord's body. So these first and second canto, remember, represent his lotus feet. And his feet are so special. And there's a beautiful verse in third canto, in chapter 28, that describes the Lord's feet. And it says, the Lord's feet act as thunderbolts, hurled to shatter the mountain of sin stored in the mind of the meditating devotee. So his lotus feet are very, very soft, but like thunderbolts, they can pierce all this massive storage of sin that we have in our hearts. And that is from many, many lifetimes. So Krishna's lotus feet are very, very important. And then, as we know, the third and fourth canto represent his thighs, the fifth his navel, the sixth his chest, the seventh and eighth his arms, the ninth his throat, the 10th his beautiful lotus face, the 11th his forehead, and the 12th canto his head. So gradually the Bhagavatam is unfolding. Just as we focus on the lotus feet, gradually we learn more and more about Krishna's pastimes. And there's another description of Krishna's lotus feet that I really love, and it goes like this. The splendour of his ruby toenails resembled the orbit of the moon and dispels the thick gloom of the heart. So not only are our great storage of sins shattered by the thunderbolts of his feet, but his brilliant effulgence from his feet dispel all of the gloom and the sadness in our hearts. So we've been studying the three ways that we can realise Krishna, through Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. Vedanti tat tatvad vidas, that verse that explains the absolute truth is realised in three phases of understanding by the knower of the absolute truth. And all of them are identical. And that is Brahman, Supersoul, and then Bhagavan. So Prabhupada gives the example in second chapter, verse 2 of Bhagavad Gita, of the sunshine. So he explains these stages of Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan as being like the sun and the sunshine. So the sunshine is the Brahman, and when you get to know a little bit more, then which is Paramatma, and that's the surface of the sun globe. And then Bhagavan realization is you're actually on the sun planet and you know everything about it. So Prabhupada gives that nice analogy to help us understand. So Devahuti Putra Kapila Dev in third canto, he also says we can meditate on other things about Krishna, about his club, which is very dear to him, and about the garland around his neck, which represents the pure devotees. And the bumblebees surround Krishna's garland. And when I was Jagannath's head pujari in Calcutta Temple in 1975, And then there were windows behind the deities, and every morning a huge bumblebee would come in, circumambulate Lord Balaram 3 times, and then fly out. And I'd be sitting there dressed in Lord Balaram, remembering all these pastimes in Krishna book, which describes the bumblebees, and these garlands that Krishna's wearing that's surrounded by massive bumblebees. So it was a very transcendental experience seeing that bumblebee coming around. So, and sometimes the yogi will meditate on the Lord's pearl necklace. Krishna wears a beautiful pearl necklace, and that represents the pure devotees of the Lord. So there's lots of wonderful descriptions. So, but now we're on to this chapter, this verse, that it's very, very interesting, and it's quite esoteric when you talk about, you know, the self merging into the super self, and it becomes quite, you know, quite a mystical thing trying to understand what Srila Prabhupada's talking about here. So it really talks, when we're reading that purport, it talks about the mind a great deal. How the yogi should merge his mind into the Atma, or the self. And in Kali Yuga, of course, that's not so easy. How we can, you know, the enigmatic mind, how do we control it? We think we are the mind, actually. You know, we can come to a point where, okay, I can kind of understand I'm not the body. I can understand there's that separation there. But for many of us, I know at least for myself, I focus on the mind. So I'm kind of thinking, well, I understand from studying the scriptures that I'm not the mind, but it's really hard to divorce yourself from the mind, because our mind's always talking to us. It's always chattering. Sometimes it's good chatter, sometimes, you know, bad. So it's something that, and the body, okay, it causes us difficulties. You know, we have illness, we have, you know, vicissitudes in life, and we have our ups and our downs. But when the mind starts to play havoc with us, it's very, very difficult to control. And we control the mind, and it's very difficult to separate as well. And the Bhagavatam and Srila Prabhupada gives us the process by which we can control the mind. And this process is the process of Bhakti Yoga. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes that the mind, when harnessed under the spiritual urge, acts wonderfully. So when we're actually got ourselves in enough control that we go, yes, I'm going to get up early, and yes, I'm going to do some meditation. And for Hare Krishna devotees, we meditate by chanting on beads. So we chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Our beads, which has 108 beads, and we chant that at minimum 16 times around every day. So that's our meditation. And then we come to the temple, just like you're doing here, and we associate with each other, we serve the deity, we worship the deity. So that makes us act wonderfully under the spiritual urge. So with the mind, we're always, as I said, we're always trying to seek enjoyment. And there's that enjoyment is divided into 2 things. There's the Shreyas and the Prayas. So tell me what Shreyas is. See if anyone's awake. Madhibanda Prabhu? What's Shreyas?
Benefits in the long run.
Activities with very quick results.
Yes, and Prayas is the long-term results. So we're often very interested in the Shreyas. So the immediate result. You know, we do this, we get that, we go here, we reach that destination, but it's not really beneficial. What we really want to do is look for that prayas, or that benefit that will come after some time. So that's what spiritual life is like. You do get an immediate benefit, but the long-term benefit is the ultimate goal. That prayas is what we seek. And, Prabhupada gives the example of the child. The child doesn't want to go to school. He just wants to play all day. And interestingly enough, Prabhupada was like that too. He hated to go to school. So he just wouldn't go to school. He'd make up all these excuses. His father would come home after the day in the shop, and his mother would say, "Oh, your son wouldn't go to school today. Why didn't you go to school today?" "Oh, I had a stomach ache. I'll go tomorrow." The next day the same thing would happen. So he was very interested in the Shreyas. Yay, don't have to go to school. I can play all day. So then his mother very cleverly hired a man who would actually take Prabhupada to school and make sure he stayed there. Because she understood the prayers that my son has to be educated. And Krishna also liked to play all day. So it's not like a completely foreign thing. And Mother Yasoda was always anxious. When is Krishna coming home? But our minds are inducing us for the Shreyas and not the prayers. So we have to control that mind as much as we can. And even if we do get that immediate enjoyment, we're still not satisfied. We're just not happy. For example, you might go, "You know what? I'm just not going to get up early this morning. I'm really tired. I'm just going to have a little lie-in." And then you fall back to sleep, you get up, and then you'll stay in bed and look at your Facebook for half an hour. And then when you get up, what do you feel? Do you feel good? No, you feel really bad. You think, "Oh my gosh, I've wasted so much time. I've got to control myself." And then when we do control our minds, and we do get up, there's that great sense of satisfaction that, yes, this one day I did the right thing. So, and Prabhupada explains in that purport that the living entity's intelligence becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament, and the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. So the Lord sees the living entity, as this verse describes, and then he dictates to the living entity. It's very interesting. In Bhagavatam, in 4th canto, chapter 24, it describes how actually Krishna in the heart induces. He can induce the living entity. It's described here that actually, if Krishna wants to direct you to devotional service, he will direct you. He will induce you. But the heart has to be ready. And then once that he has induced you, and these are the very words used, Prabhupada explains, he then sanctions the devotional service. So at every opportunity, or like every direction, we're relying on Krishna. And when we develop that mood of prayer and praying to Krishna for help, then Krishna does listen to us. So, and this word labdo pashanti, it's very important, and it's the transcendental state of full bliss and the cessation of all hankerings. So all material hankerings go away, because the mind is the cause of bondage. It's actually the mind that we think is, just so wonderful, and it can be our best friend, but it can be, as Bhagavatam, or rather Bhagavad Gita describes, it can be our worst enemy. And these are themes that Srila Prabhupada constantly uses. We're not this body. The mind can be the best friend, the mind can be the worst enemy. And even though they may be seemingly simple, they actually contain a wealth of spiritual knowledge. And it's very, very important that all throughout our spiritual life that we focus on those things. Of course, it's very wonderful to, develop more and more understanding of the philosophy and increase our knowledge. It's all very important. But if you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, pretty much every lecture, you are not this body. So we need to really focus on this, that we are not the body. And a friend of mine, a senior godbrother of mine, was telling me once that another godbrother of his said to him, "So, what have you realized after practicing Krishna consciousness for 50 years? What is your realization?" And my godbrother answered, and he said, "I am beginning to come to the platform And he used the words, I'm beginning to come to the platform of understanding that I'm not this body. So it's such a critical thing to understand that. And we need to really, try and focus on that. And of course, one of the greatest concepts of Krishna consciousness is not only service to Krishna, but what's more dear to Krishna. In fact, what is more dear to Krishna than service to him? Srimati? Yes, beautiful answer. Absolutely on the money. Yes, it's service to his devotee. And Krishna says, Mad Bhaktya Puja Avyayat, that worship of my devotee is more pleasing to me. And he also says that actually there's many, many verses in Bhagavatam that describe this, the critical importance of serving the pure devotee of the Lord, because the pure devotee of the Lord is the one who is most dear to him. And in Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada cites a verse from the Adi Purana, and I'll read it out here. Krishna is addressing Arjuna, and he says, my dear Pata, Pata is another name for Arjuna, one who claims to be my devotee is not so. Only a person who claims to be a devotee of my devotee is actually my devotee. And in 4th Canto, chapter 30, there's a very wonderful purport where it goes, my dear Narada, actually I do not reside in my abode, Vaikuntha, nor do I reside within the heart of the yogis. Here we're back to the yogis again. But I reside in that place where my pure devotee chants my holy name and discusses my form, pastimes and qualities. So Srila Prabhupada is not only our founder Acharya of ISKCON, he started this movement in 1965 under great, great difficulties, but he is the dearmost devotee of Lord Krishna. And by serving Prabhupada, then we get the mercy of Krishna. And we have the book Bhagavatam, and we have the person Bhagavat. And Srila Prabhupada is the person Bhagavat. So when there might be some philosophical questions, and we might say, oh yes, the answer is in the conversation Prabhupada had, or comment that Srila Prabhupada made, but actually we don't need to look any further than that. So we can say, oh, Prabhupada said in a room conversation in 1975 this thing. We don't need to go, yes, but where in Bhagavatam does Prabhupada say, is it said in Bhagavatam? Because Prabhupada is Bhagavatam. So everything Srila Prabhupada says is based solely in scripture. From the previous acharyas, commentaries, from Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada does not speculate. So any reference that we cite, it's perfectly acceptable to cite the reference of Srila Prabhupada, because we come to the realization that anything Prabhupada says is based on Guru, Sadhu and Sastra. So that's a very, very important point. And Prabhupada said time and time again that my qualification, my one qualification, and of course we understand Srila Prabhupada is an ocean of qualifications, but in his humility, he said that my one qualification is that I repeat what my spiritual master has said. And I'm praying that in this class that I have repeated exactly and faithfully what Srila Prabhupada had said. So Prabhupada didn't concoct. He was very expert at preaching according to Kala Desha Patra, according to time, place and circumstance. And we've seen that in all of his conversations and lectures. You can see that according to the audience, he adjusts. So because he's the person Bhagavat, and he has total fidelity to the Lord, we're in a very, very safe place. So I'd like to end that. Oh, actually, I will end in a minute in case there's any questions or comments. But something I heard very recently in one of the memories of Prabhupada's disciples, and one disciple asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, if we remember you at the time of death instead of Krishna, will we go back to Godhead? And he describes that Prabhupada closed his eyes for a minute, short time, and he opened his eyes and he said yes. So even if we can't remember Krishna, but we remember Prabhupada, then Krishna will take us back, because Prabhupada is Krishna's most dear, dear devotee. So thank you very much for patiently listening to me. And if there's any questions related to the verse or any comments, adjustments.
See the soul as a type of merging. Like you use the example, you jump into a lake, you're merged into the lake, but you haven't lost your independence. That's one way.
Yes, that's very good. The questioner has answered his own question. But it's quite difficult concepts, in these particular verses. To understand, impersonalism and Mayavad, and then Brahman, and all the different merging into the self. They're not really straightforward verses, but it's a good answer. I like that answer. I'll accept that answer.
At the start of the purport, explains in the 319 verses, merging the mind with the supreme. He says, in the true mind acts for the true advancement of knowledge, destructively ending in discovering nuclear weapons. When the mind acts under the spiritual urge, it acts wonderfully. So that's just another. I think it's just another explanation of becoming Krishna conscious, or becoming absorbed in Krishna rather than things that don't involve Krishna. But just that when you read it at a glance, it's got almost a Mayavadi sort of tone to it.
Yes, and it's esoteric. It's very esoteric.
And it's been said many times that Srila Swami had a mixed audience, and there's many verses throughout the Bhagavatam where you could deduct an impersonal conclusion if you didn't know the goal and purpose of the Bhagavatam.
Yes, and that's why it's even more critical to read and understand Prabhupada's purports. It's not enough just to read the verses in Bhagavatam. We actually have to go into the deeper meanings that Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas. And as you all know, when Prabhupada would be translating, he'd have a number of very large Sanskrit books that contain the commentaries. So you have his spiritual master and other previous acharyas. He would always consult. And one of the great expertise of the pure devotee is that he can adjust according to his own realizations as well. So Prabhupada was particularly expert in helping the Western audience understand the scriptures, particularly expert. If anyone who's read Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati's works that have been translated into English, very, very hard to understand. I mean, the language is difficult to understand. But Srila Prabhupada was so inspired by Krishna, and Prabhupada, as you know, said many times, Krishna has written these purports, that special gift to help us all understand with incredible analogies, etc. So any other comments, questions?
You mentioned how even just coming to do devotional service, even once taking birth in a rich family or a family of devotees in the next life, it seems like taking birth in a rich family could hamper one's spiritual advancement because of all the facility for the 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom houses. Be
mansion.
Could you comment on that? Why are you
Yes, well, my understanding of that is that when one's born into a rich family, one doesn't have to worry about material necessities. So generally, for example, Ambarish Das, born into the Ford family, incredibly wealthy dynasty. But he didn't have to worry about, how he was going to earn a wage or pay his mortgage. He didn't have a mortgage. But he utilised that facility he'd been given in understanding, well, even with all my wealth, I'm still not happy. So if someone's very fortunate, of course, being born in the home of a devotee is, of course, better. But even for those who are born in a very rich family, there is a chance that they will then, instead of in their next life having to take birth in a lower species, they will utilise that benefit they've been given by engaging in some kind of philosophical and spiritual goals. Rupa Prabhu?
Srila Prabhupada says that generally, for those who are born in very poor families and they're suffering a lot, they're struggling a lot, it's very difficult to take a spiritual life because they just think, yeah, where's their next meal and how to put a roof over their head. And on the other hand, those who are very rich, it's also very difficult because they're so proud and puffed up. And it's like the earth planet is like the perfect place. So that in the heavenly planet it's difficult for the demigods because there's so much wealth and so much opulence. And the hellish planet is also very difficult to take to Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada said the earthly region is the best place for Krishna consciousness. And also Prabhupada says, I remember reading that even though people may have this opportunity, they've done devotional service and they take birth in a rich family in the next life, but Prabhupada says in Kali Yuga that unfortunately those born in many rich families, there's fires in those families of so many problems and drug addiction and families falling apart. So it's not always so fortunate people in such a situation.
Yes, I was just reading recently actually that Prabhupada says that the demigods are actually hoping to take birth on the earth planet so that they can practice devotional service, because that level of enjoyment is so high that they can be tinged with some material desires. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he prays that I just want to be born as a worm in the house of a devotee. So even if you're not born in the house of a devotee as a member of the family, just to have somehow or other have that association of the devotee is so important. And the devotee association, or the sadhu sangha, is so critical to our spiritual life. And we often not necessarily misuse it, but we don't appreciate it. So living in a community when we've got, lots of different personalities, lots of different ways of acting, behaving, if we don't relish the fact that, yes, these persons have come here to advance in their spiritual life, to serve Srila Prabhupada, serve their spiritual masters, serve Krishna, and we only see the little things that we don't like, oh, I don't like the way he does that, I don't like the way she does this, then we're really not taking advantage properly. So to try and cultivate that real respect and appreciation despite things our mind's telling us, once again the mind, then we can make good advancement in Krishna consciousness. So, avoiding that Vaishnava Ninda, that aparad against devotees. Even if you're in a situation where you're being annoyed, we need to learn how to control, our anger, control our disagreements, and really appreciate and understand that, and Prabhupada said this, we are all one family. And when a family member is ill or suffering some problems, then we all rally together to try and help them. And that's very, very important. And we try and do that here at New Govardhana with our Vaishnava Care Committee. And, so many devotees who have such deep and such good hearts that, they'll come together to help anyone who's in difficulty. So I think that's very important. Really, when you're with devotees, really appreciate how wonderful it is to have such genuine association. Okay? All right, thank you so much. Jai. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Untitled Bhagavatam ki Jai.